Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Friday, September 26th, 2025, and today we're talking fungal to bacterial ratios for soil health and whether it means anything for you. We discuss biochar and the death of curiosity, and it is Feedback Friday, so let's do it. All right, welcome to Friday, everyone. I hope you all are doing smashingly. The farm is finally getting back to its old wet clay self, which is good, I guess. The temperatures have been nice, though, of course, it's supposed to be a little warm this weekend because it just can't help itself this year. And I got some more lettuce into the tunnel yesterday, which feels like a success with October 1st as my goal. Now, getting garlic in and sweet potatoes, out of the ground loom large on the list, but we're cruising along. Then it's smooth sailing into the fall from there. Let us know how you all are looking heading into the fall. And as always, you can do so with a 20-second farm video clip that you can send to farmermike@notillgrowers.com. Really love those. They truly make my day every time I see one. So shouts to that. Anyway, it is Friday, which means Feedback Friday, where we explore what you all were saying about this week's topics. On Monday, we talked about silage tarps, plus winter-killed cover crops and garlic together, and there were several comments on that latter topic. At Blender Bender Guy, which that's fun to say, asked, quote, "What about buckwheat and garlic? That should easily winter kill, at least in Zone 6A. I'd think it would lay down a good mulch," end quote. So great question here. Buckwheat will definitely winter kill, and I actually have some planted as a winter kill cover crop, not with the garlic, but in another place that I will definitely need it to winter kill. I don't want it going to seed. But the challenge with buckwheat is that it is extremely thin in both the roots and the above ground biomass, so it doesn't really lay down much of a mulch. Generic bean could be, work a little bit better, have a little bit more biomass. They're still pretty thin, but not quite as thin as buckwheat. But the nice thing with the peas is that they will survive a few frosts, then they will continue to get tall, fix some nitrogen in the process, and then they'll die, creating a little bit of a mulch. I mean, it's not much of a mulch, but it's something at least over the winter. Buckwheat is just a little too tender to make a huge difference there, I'm afraid. At YKing333 asked, quote, "Any reason you shouldn't put the garlic and the winter kill cover crop in at the same time as opposed to separated by a week or so? I'd find it easier to do it together so it's still clear where I planted the cover crop. I feel like after a week, I'd lose my place," end quote. Great question. So some of that will depend on your location and your garlic. For me, it makes sense to spread the planting out, plant the winter kill cover crop first and then the garlic later, because I want the max amount of biomass from the peas, from the pea cover crop, but I don't necessarily want to plant my garlic too early out of fear of it getting fried in the cold after growing too tall before the winter really hits. In other words, I just don't want to plant my winter killed peas at the same time as my garlic, so the separation of a couple weeks is the trade-off there. And doing it in rows makes it easier because I can plant my garlic in between those visible rows of peas. Easy peasy. I'm just going to let that one sit there for a second. On the silage tarps front, at TMC Rock wrote, quote, "Question on the silage tarps. I created my garden with a tarp 4 years ago. Tarp from April to July in Oklahoma. I am now fighting crabgrass, Johnson grass, and some Bermuda." Well, that's quite a mix there. Sorry for that. "I plan to sacrifice the entire season next year. So my question, do I leave the tarp on undisturbed or peel back periodically in water to allow seeds to germinate and then recover it with the tarp? The Bermuda is a separate issue, but I think I know what to do about it," end quote. Okay, interesting question. I would probably leave the tarp there in water underneath occasionally. I don't see any reason not to necessarily because the seeds will need moisture to germinate. Maybe consider, instead of peeling it back, though, just adding some drip lines underneath so you don't have to fiddle with the tarps regularly. That's what I would do, but the moisture should help, just having that, a little bit of a drip line under there or something. On Tuesday, I talked about my garlic from California that didn't thrive because the conditions where it was bred are so different from my own here in Kentucky. And at Devin Sullivan 7233 wrote, quote, "Hey, Jesse, you mentioned that Kentucky is colder and wetter during the winter than California. California has zones ranging from 5A to 11A. I would guess that is by far the most zones out of any state in the country. That is because we have the widest range of latitude variation. We also have some of the biggest elevation changes you will find anywhere in the country, from 282 feet below sea level in Death Valley to 14,500 feet above sea level in the Sierra Nevada mountains, not to mention the coastal mountain range, which has more microclimates than probably anywhere in the world. I have farms in both zones 9A and 9B, and they have vastly different advantages and disadvantages for specific crops. 9A is at 1,850 feet elevation, and 9B is at 60 feet elevation. It's perfect because anything that doesn't thrive in one location really thrives at the other. The two properties are also only a 40-minute drive from each other, end quote. Thanks, and totally fair clarification there. I simply meant that when I was talking about the garlic, that the area where that specific garlic was grown, like coastal dry California, is basically the opposite of Kentucky. Not all of California is that way necessarily, and definitely not one single way throughout the entire state. For sure, California is very unique and diverse and frankly humongous, and I have a lot of love for it. I always am fascinated by the biodiversity there. I also talked that day about tarps, and at Wilmo1878 wrote, quote, I'm just finding it hard to think of cutting down the use of things like silage tarps. My country is exporting one illegal immigrant a day on a flight to France. My use of things like a tarp is minuscule in comparison. It's the big decisions that will make the difference. Us plebes shouldn't have to make major sacrifices for the decision makers. It used to cause me a lot of stress, and now I've let it go. No matter what changes I make, Taylor Swift could wipe my lifetime of sacrifice in a week, end quote. So I get where you're coming from here, but the tarps on your soil specifically are going to create microplastics in your soil that is going to go into your food for you or whoever you sell it to. That's the specific issue here. And then after that, it will go into a landfill or into the ocean, which makes them more of a broader community or world issue. I also want to push back a little bit on this idea that we have no personal responsibility to take care of the planet because other people don't care and maybe do more harm than us. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm not by any means, or that you have to be. But when hundreds of millions of people think that way, it kind of adds up. A sort of precedent needs to be set. A social pressure needs to be made. The things you're saying about sacrifice are true, and that needs to be explicit to people who are not making those sacrifices, that that's important and we're not going to do it for nothing. Our planet cannot go down in a flaming pile of apathy. Absolutely, it is the responsibility of governments to set restrictions and force/encourage a more sustainable world, but oil execs and others who have really massive financial stakes here really love it when we do these sort of whataboutisms. They don't have to make us hate change, these oil execs. They have to make us feel like, why should we be the ones who have to change? And every time we sort of fall for that, an oil exec gets its wings. And by that, I mean specifically like a new private jet for their dog. Probably. On Wednesday, we talked about resellers, people who buy produce and then resell it. And at our Blong fellow wrote, quote, not a fan of resellers. It undermines local farmers and discourages real growers from filling those niches. It also gives customers the wrong idea about seasonality and leads to unrealistic expectations. Many people have the expectation that they're getting fresh food from local farms. When they go to a farmer's market, it's not called a reseller's market after all, end quote. Yeah, that's fine. That's a totally fair perspective. To be clear, I'm not an advocate for reselling necessarily, but I do see some positives or at least some potential in working together or alongside resellers, especially if they already exist. I think that the idea of keeping more of those dollars that will inevitably be spent at a grocery store on out-of-season produce at the market and in the local community instead is going to be better for the community in general. But I just think it's good to have that perspective that resellers aren't always 100% bad. Sometimes there's an advantage there, right? It's like the silver lining thing. Then on Thursday, we discussed big old brassica's success, and at Classic Rock Lover 5615 wrote, quote, personally, I found brassicas take a bit of bone meal, and I think the largest impact on the size of heads is variety. You can get 50 days to maturity and 80 plus days to maturity broccoli. The 80 plus days to maturity will have larger heads due to the longer growing period, but you can't plant a 50 day to maturity variety and just leave it in the ground. And extra 30 days to achieve a larger head. It will bolt on you, end quote. Yeah, I mean, nothing about the bone meal. That really will depend on your soil tests, but a good addition here. And I also find that those longer season ones, and this is true of most longer season crops, have more complexity in terms of flavor. They've just been in the ground longer and been able to, collect more nutrients and just become more interesting overall. Also this week, I think it was Monday, I don't remember where I got this quote from, but at Farmer Michelle wrote, quote, why did no-till growers become a 501c3, end quote. And I covered this when it happened, but essentially we have always operated no-till growers like a nonprofit, even though we were a for-profit company, just giving away the information and trying to be creative about how to make that financially possible for ourselves. Then, especially as TikTok started to, cut heavily into YouTube ad revenue, which is going to get a lot worse as AI saturates the creator market and information space, taking taking even more eyes away from things like YouTube. We needed more money to just keep it going, and just realized that we were cutting off a whole potential funding source in grant funding, which is more favorable to nonprofits, or it was when grants were a thing. Plus, we were missing out on any larger donations from individuals, which as a private company were just harder to ask for because they weren't getting any sort of tax incentive. So becoming a nonprofit just made sense, really, for us, for this particular business model. Although, to be honest with you, this business model is very dumb, and it does not make very much money for anyone involved for the amount of work it takes, especially. But we are really proud of this work we do, and we feel this sort of information, this sort of growing information, should be free and open to the public so that more people can grow food, keep gardens, get the exercise and mental health benefits of growing produce, perhaps start businesses as well as play or coach or watch soccer, obviously, because that's also important. So thank you to everyone who supports us. You all rock, and we'll just keep it going as long as we can. And thanks as always for being great commenters. There is always just so much more in there that I can ever get to, so shouts to you all. Anyway, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, the exciting world of fungal to bacterial ratios, which is indeed actually very interesting and nerdy. BRB. I am now a swallowtail breeder. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Farmhand. Farmhand is the virtual assistant built for farmers, helping CSAs scale sales, run error-free fulfillment, and deliver 5-star service. Whether you're at 100 members or 1,000, Farmhand helps you grow without burning out. You've heard us and our farmers right here on Growers Daily. Explore farmer wins and learn more at farmhand.partners/no-till. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener or viewer, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere the questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions now. Today's Patreon question comes to us from Patreon member Bill Marshall, who asks, quote, "Hello, Jesse. Would you discuss the topic of fungal to bacterial ratios in soil? How important is it to plants during the various stages of germination and growth? What I've read indicates 1-to-1 ratio is desirable, but that seems oversimplified. Do you look at this ratio in your beds? If yes, what soil test do you utilize? Within the context of your methods, what processes/non-synthetic inputs might help growers work towards a favorable ratio in their context and desired crops?" End quote. All right, Bill, thanks for this question. And it's something that has come up several times over the years, but I don't hear people talk so much about it lately. And I think part of that is really because even the researchers are still trying to understand how important this is, if at all, and for which crops. All right, so to back up, the argument is essentially that you want your soil in balance of fungi to bacteria for the best production. Like, you don't want it overly bacterial or overly fungal. Overly bacterial soils, often associated with tillage, can equate to high nutrient turnover, thus loss of those nutrients, which amounts to lower carbon sequestration and organic matter production, etc. Soils with lower bacterial but higher fungal levels, like in a forest, tend to have slower decomposition and lower available nutrients, but rather retain the nutrients for longer. Having fungal dominant soils in a garden is not a common thing because gardens are, by their very nature, with the types of plants we grow, recovery species mostly. Trying their whole thing is to recover land that has been disturbed, and along with the fast turnover, tend to lean more on the bacterial side of things. So, okay, what then is the ideal ratio for gardens or market gardens? Well, like I said, researchers are still trying to figure that out, but the short answer is that the ideal ratio is just biodiversity. That's it. Different bacteria, some fungi, both saprotrophic and mycorrhizal, some arthropods and beneficial nematodes, and etc. Effectively, you want a wide array of healthy soil life with a good amount of bacteria, but also some fungi. So do I look at these ratios? No, not really. I like to see that there are, fungi, bacteria, and a diversity of critters in the soil in either our Haney soil tests or in the microscope. But beyond that, I'm not overly fixated on this exact idea. This is especially true because accuracy in testing is, hard to accomplish to even figure out what ratio you have. Studies demonstrate that accurate measurements are really only conducted through phospholipid fatty acid PLFA tests, but even those are not necessarily consistent across labs, so you may get two different readings from the same soil sample because, soil is incredibly dynamic, inch by inch, and people test things differently. The best way to increase that diversity, ensure you have a workable, quote-unquote, ratio of this soil life is to not overly pulverize the soil. Heavy tillage favors bacteria, especially at the level of the rhizosphere, And well-made, well-cured compost from microbial populations and microbial habitat will help as well. Composts that are cured right can also contain a good number of beneficial fungi, so want to make sure to properly make that compost. Also, grow plants as much as possible. Plants help to keep things like mycorrhizal fungi alive. In general, if you follow the principles of no-till/conservation agriculture of, disturb the soil as little as possible, keep it covered as much as possible, and plant it as much as possible, that should help you maintain the right balance of microbial life for your soil. Oh, and water. Microbes need lots of moisture, fungi, bacteria, archaea, all of it. Make sure they get that. Anyway, that's pretty much it. That's pretty much what I've arrived at on this particular subject. But I, as always, don't have a monopoly on all the good ideas or good insights, so feel free to let me know what you all think. Otherwise, it's break time. And when we come back, wouldn't you like to know? That's actually kind of a hint. It's a terrible one, but it is a hint. Be right back.
Farmer Claire Coleman here from the Winter Growers Podcast. Did you know that I also founded Real Farmer Care, a nonprofit that supports farmer well-being? From my own experiences farming, I knew firsthand that this type of support was missing from ag, so I decided to do something about it. As of today, there are over 500 farmer recipients of a $100 self-care award, with more applying daily. If you'd like to help, each $100 donated supports one new farmer. Visit realfarmercare.com to donate and learn more. Again, that's realfarmercare.com.
So let me ask you a question. When you were a kid, were you curious? Are your kids curious now, or your grandkids? Do they have, hundreds of questions a day, and do you answer them thoughtfully? Now, are you still that way? And do you encourage your child's curiosity? The thing is, and the reason I ask, is I've landed on this concern I have with the world, one that I have in some ways expressed here before, that curiosity is somewhat dead, or at least dying among adults. That we as a culture have squished it both in ourselves and for other people. What I mean is that we are quick to draw conclusions about people and what they believe or what they're doing based on what we quote unquote know, and not on what they say or what they do or why they do it. Sure, this can be political, certainly, but it can also be exceedingly simple things. For instance, and I don't mean to pick on this person, so I'm not going to name them, but there is this commenter who has been fixated on this idea that we promoted a quote unquote bad product in the Ring of Fire biochar kiln and won't quote unquote fess up to it. I assume here that they don't believe the biochar cannot be made in an open kiln, but here's the thing, it can be made well, and there is good science behind that. The designer of this product, Kelpie Wilson, author of the Biochar Handbook, has provided a lot of details about how open flame biochar production works, or can work, all over the place, including in an interview for the No Till Market Garden podcast, which you should listen to. And although I'm not going to argue whether this product is worth the price or not, I don't know. The technology is scientifically sound, and moreover, it's mobile, which is at least part of the point. The kiln can be moved to a remote location and handled with low labor, which is why some Forest Service use it or similar designs. But my goal here is not to argue the merits of flame-capped or flame-curtain biochar kilns, though that could be an excellent future segment, but rather that this is just demonstrative of a larger trend I see in the world where I don't think people are asking and investigating the things that rile them up. Being mad is just easier than being informed. Anger is easily accessible. Knowledge, by contrast, takes work and often humility, the willingness to be wrong. It also just takes asking a question. If this person had just said, okay, I think biochar is one thing and can be made one way, but I should just check to make sure there isn't something to this idea of an open biochar kiln before berating this random YouTube personality over it. They could have saved themselves many wasted minutes commenting, but also maybe learned something new about the, low emission accessible biochar production using flame cap pyrolysis, which is actually really interesting. But we just don't do that anymore as a culture, and maybe never have. But we take what we know or what we think we know about the world and assume that's enough, or assume we're right. And the other side is just wrong, and more terrifyingly, that the other side is even evil. Obviously, I've steered off biochar here. I don't think anybody thinks that people who believe in flame cap pyrolysis are evil. But anyway, and we do so without first asking the question of why this idea exists and what is the actual argument. I talked in an earlier episode of the show about the important art of asking questions, of finding questions, being curious, of questioning not just others, but ourselves. To me, the solution we're all looking for in the world, especially at a time where political tensions are run really high and biochar hot takes are clearly run amok, is in questions, not answers. It's in curiosity, not opinions. And it's in challenging ourselves to wonder, just wonder, period. To just think, what is the counter argument here? Could I be missing something? Anyway, all that to say, let's go racing Louisville. Brighton and every other soccer team I follow this weekend. I hope you all have a great weekend yourselves, and we'll call it a Friday. But first, a quick word from our friends at Rimmel Greenhouse Systems. Whether you're growing tomatoes for market, flowers in the spring, or vegetables for your family, growing in a high tunnel protected from the weather provides the right environment for a harvest you can count on. Rimmel greenhouses are strong, durable, and easy to assemble, offering the quality you need to grow productively year-round. The team of experts at Rimmel Greenhouse Systems will be your trusted partners to ensure you get exceptional value from your greenhouse or high tunnel investment. Visit Rimmel.com today to get growing. Don't forget, No-Till Growers is now officially a 501c3 for reasons that I explained earlier in this episode, which you probably heard if you're still listening. So donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. You can learn more about how to do that in the show notes. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor this show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at no-tillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a hat or a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, at no-tillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, you sign up in the month of September, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Bill Barnes, Jay Mulder, Kyle Richardville, Patrick Weaver, Alex and Oliver, Bill King, Chris Yates, and Ian at Grindstone Farms. Shouts to all of you. All right, so keeping the story going, our farmer, Susie, has tossed a few peanuts to the boar who's caught in the fence and standing between her and the getaway. And it's eating, the boar is. So Susie decides to start crawling out, painfully scooting past all the woven wire that the boar is wrapped up in. Finally, she manages to get behind the boar and past the fence, her knee and leg absolutely throbbing. And she notices something. She notices that she could fairly easily pull the fence in one direction and the boar would, if it pulled back, be freed. So she takes a deep breath and pulls hard on the fencing, and the boar pops out just right away with a light grunting squeal. Then they both turn and look at the door at the same time, where there appears 4 more boars, one of whom is extremely large. And there is a moment of panic and pain, of course, and fear that shoots through Susie. But the boar she had been with all night for almost a full day, who she'd just fed some peanuts to and freed, turns quickly and bolts for the forest, out the door. The other boars, startled, look at Susie, look at the boar, and then they follow right behind. And Susie, relieved, tired, limps her way back to her house to get her peanuts boiling. Thanks for watching and or listening. We will see you on Monday. Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye.